one of the most popular use cases that we see people building on Bubble is a two-sided marketplace. I'm thrilled to introduce our instructor, Bubble's very own VP of Product, Alan Yang, who will walk us through how to build a marketplace page. Alan, would you like to say a few words about the class you're teaching today?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Hi, everybody. So the lesson you're about to see walks through the basics of setting up a marketplace app. And in this case, it's a marketplace for booksellers. We're going to walk through the setup of the database, then the design of the main product search page, and then we're going to have some steps to hook up all the logic for that. I believe a subsequent class is going to show what it's like to take this even further. But first things first is building all the foundations. So let's jump in. Hi, everybody. My name is Alan Yang. I'm VP of Product here at Bubble, and I'm really excited to be joining you all today. So to start off, the way I like to start building a Bubble app is to think about the database structure. For this book marketplace app, I'm thinking that we'll need two concepts to start. The first one I'll actually create is shop. So this is, a user who has books to sell. They create an account here, and they are kind of like creating their, digital storefront, so to speak. When I think about what types of information I want on a shop, I'm going to start with just creating a name field, which is text. And this might be okay for me to start now. Of course, later on, as we have more and more functionality, we can always come back and add more fields. But I think a name on a shop might be enough for us to start here. And then another very important data type is the product. So these are books. I'm calling it product just to be a little more generalized. And there are definitely a few pieces of information that we want about every book that's being sold in the marketplace. So for example, we definitely want the name, which is text. Perhaps we want a description of each book, which is also text. The price is obviously going to be important for a marketplace, and this will be a number. And then seller shop. And this, of course, shows one of the powerful features of the Bubble database, which is that you can build relationships between one data type and another. So in this case, the seller shop should be one of the shop things in the app. So what has been set up now is that in our app, there are shops and there are products, and each product belongs to a particular shop. There are some additional pieces of information that I want here. So for example, for each book, maybe I want the genre of the book. Genre is kind of a special concept because I know there's a certain set of genres that I want, and I only want books to be part of one of those pre-specified genres. So for something like that, that's where the option sets feature comes in and can be super helpful. So we have a wonderful introductory video here for folks who are new to the feature, but I'll go ahead and create a couple of option sets. The first one will be a set of different genres which books can belong to, and maybe just to start, I'll create a couple genres here like fantasy, maybe I'll have romance books, maybe I'll have thriller books. Another option set I can have is format, because I know I want print books to be sold here, but also digital books and maybe even audiobooks. And I'll create one more for book type, because we might have novels, we might have comic books, and we might have anthologies of short stories, for example. And I'm just kind of creating these quickly now because these will be some of the filters that we offer. So just kind of showing what some of these capabilities look like. So I just created those option sets, and I know that each book should have information about where they are in those option sets. So for example, each book should specify its genre, and it should only be one of the genres I have pre-specified in that option set. So I'll create that. Format was another option set, so we'll connect that to the book format option set, and type and book type. Great. So this database structure or schema should be enough for us to create that main marketplace page we're aiming for. But first, one thing that's helpful as you're building is, of course, having some sample data in the database. So I'm going to go over here to the app data tab, and I'm going to go ahead and create some sample data in here. I'm going to create 3 shops and maybe 6 products with kind of a whole variety of metadata. Really, this is up to you. You could probably get by in this example with just 2 shops and 2 products. If you wanted, of course, you can create more if you want. But I'm just going to take a minute here to do that. So give me 1 second. All right. So we've got our sample data loaded into the app. So I'm going to create a new page here called maybe search. And this will be one of the main pages of the Marketplace app where a user can see the list of products being sold and have a few filters in search boxes that they can use to filter and search the list. Because in my mind, this page is going to be laid out top to bottom, I'm going to use the column layout here for the entire page. And just for the purposes of this class and to kind of get something working quickly, I'm going to go ahead and use the component library. So maybe I'll drag in this header at the top. Then I have a group that I want to bring in for the body. And I'm just going to scroll down here and find a footer to use. Great. So the group I dropped in, I'm thinking that it'll be kind of left to right oriented. So because it's left to right oriented, I'm going to make this a row layout. And I don't want it to be fixed width. I want it to be able to just expand to fill the entire space here. And just for cleanliness, I am going to be renaming some of the elements on the page here. Start the name of this element with a G to stand for group, and then call it dashboard here. So this group is already set to a row, which is great. I'm going to drop a group here. I'm just going to immediately rename it group filters to help myself orient, and then a repeating group here, which maybe I'll call RG for repeating group products. And this repeating group, I want to let it be able to expand to fill up the rest of the space. And actually, just for the sake of being able to visually see a difference here, I'm going to apply a style that I developed to this left group here. Great. So the first thing we can do here is to hook up this repeating group to the list of products that we have in the database. So for now, I'm just going to set it to display products and to do a search for all products. Basically, I'm thinking kind of top to bottom layout. So for the cells container layout here, I'm going to update this to column. And I'm going to go ahead and start adding elements in here. So the first one here, I'm going to have be the current cells products name. I'm going to go ahead and fix this layout a little bit. Maybe I want this to be able to expand horizontally too. And I don't need so much kind of vertical breathing room there. So I'm just going to change the minimum height to 5. And this, because this text element is kind of roughly formatted the way I want, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste for the next row of text, which will be the description. After that, for this next line, I think I want both the price and the seller to show up. So I'm going to go ahead and I copied and pasted the text element, and I'm going to draw the price here. And here I'm going to format as a currency. This app will be in dollars, and maybe I'll show 2 decimal places with a dot here. And what I want to the right of this is the name of the seller. So because this line is going to be left to right, I'm going to wrap this in a row group. I will copy and paste this again. And I'm going to show this in the elements tree. And you can see here that I'm trying to get this text element into this group up here that I just created. So I can just click and drag that here. And great, it snaps to be in the same row group. Here, actually, maybe I'll just kind of copy and paste this group, which is great because it already comes with 2 text elements. And I know I ultimately want 3, right? Genre, format, and type. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste that right now as well. So this first box text element, I want it to be genre. For the option it is showing, I need to say, what about that option do I want to show the text of? And it's actually what we call the display. So this is like the word that I set for that genre. So like thriller, romance, etc. And kind of similarly, I'm going to go ahead and make this one the format, the book's format, and I'll make this one the type. Great. I am going to take a second to just reformat things a little bit to look a little bit neater. Great. So this has a lot of the metadata about the product, which is terrific. But on the right side of the cell, I actually want maybe a little heart icon so that users can eventually, click it to favorite the product, as well as a button. The button will probably be to purchase the item or to find out more about the item. That kind of implies that I actually want the cell to be a row layout. But you'll remember that for now, we've built it as a column layout. So that's okay. What I can do is take all the existing content and wrap it into a column container to kind of maintain the vertical layout there. So I'm going to just move all the different text fields in the products groups here into this column group. And then I'm going to add another group to the right of this. And trying to get the cursor just right. Oh, didn't quite hit it, but maybe what I'll do actually is I'll just turn this into a row layout first. And I'll move this group I just dropped into the repeating group, which is terrific. This group here, I can change the layout features. So I'm thinking of having the icon and the button side by side with each other. So that implies a row container type. I'm going to make these kind of make the items inside all flush to the right in a second. Fixed width might actually work here. So I'll just keep this for now. Maybe I'll make it a little bit smaller, 200. But it doesn't need to be 280 pixels at minimum. So maybe I'll just set this to be 50 for now. And in a second, we can tweak this a little bit. So from here, I can add in an icon into this row, or into this group, I should say. So we'll just kind of put a heart icon there. And then I'll put a button. I'll just drop it here for now. And I actually want the button to be on the very right. So I can go over to layout and I can click this next button to get it to move over to the right. So a couple things might help make this look a little neater. The first one is I want the button and the icon to be vertically centered within the group. And so that's what this vertical alignment setting here allows me to do. So if, it'll be a little more obvious for this icon, and you'll see it's now centered within the group. And I even want this group to be vertically centered within the cell. I can use the same setting for that group there. One more thing to clean up a little bit is I want to put a little bit of spacing between the icon and the button. So that can be accomplished in a few different ways, but how I'll do it here is to apply gap spacing between the elements, and maybe I'll say 10 pixels of space between the columns. So there you go. So this is the basic layout of the repeating group part. And let's actually take a quick preview of this and just see what it looks like. Terrific. We have all the different pieces of information about the product. We have an icon and button here. One thing I'm noticing is that this is only showing 4 of the items. So I can just go back to this repeating group here. And yeah, this is why, because the default setting here is for it to show a set 4 rows. So I'm just going to unclick this now. And we see that now we can see all 6 items. Okay, great. So now that our repeating group is set up, let's focus on the filters. So let's think about what filters we want. It might be nice to have a search box or a search over the names of the books. For our purposes here, I'm going to do this with an input field. I can turn this filters group into a column layout because I want all these different filters to be arrayed from top to bottom. I'll put a slider next for the user to be able to filter price. And then I'll have a few sets of radio buttons. So I'm going to add 4 sets of radio buttons for maybe book genre, for book format, book type. And I think for now, I want users to be able to filter by the seller. So I'm going to go ahead and use a radio button set for that as well. And I know I'm going to want the ability for users to clear filters. So I'm just going to put a button down there for that functionality. Okay, let's clean this filter group up a little bit. The first thing I'm going to do is add a few text elements for labels here. So for example, this first search box will be name search. And I'm going to let it expand to fill the space provided. I'm going to make this 100 min width. And I'm just going to shrink the height a little bit. And this text element, I'm just going to copy and paste and kind of use these buttons here to adjust where they are in the group. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a bunch of labels to help clear stuff up. Terrific. For the slider input here, I want people to be able to, specify the maximum price that they're interested in. So maybe for now, I'll just set this to be 0 to 100 because none of our sample data has prices more than 100. And I'll set the step to be 5 here, just to not make it so granular. I'm going to let this stretch to fill the space. And the slider input doesn't by default come with a little label for what value it's set at now. So I can actually put that into this text element above it. And maybe I'll say max price here, and I'll insert dynamic data to take the slider inputs value here. And I'll format it as a currency, just to be clear. But for this, I'm just going to have whole numbers, not decimal places. So we'll have this. And maybe for the default here, or the initial content, I'll set it at 100, so the maximum value. Great. Next thing we can clean up are these radio button sets. So I'm just going to go ahead and hook each of these up to the different option sets or the data of options that we want. So this first radio button here will be for genre. In order to access option sets for the choices, we have to switch this to dynamic choices. And we can see our option set options here. So book genre, we want all the book genres to show up. And for each option, we want the current options display. So again, that's the word of options. So like thriller, romance, etc. So that's genre. And I'm going to do the same thing quickly for format. And the same thing for book type. Okay, seller shop is a little bit different because we want this to draw from the database. So this would also involve dynamic choices, and we want to show shops. And for now, we're just going to show all shops. So all shops here. And for each of the shops that gets pulled up, we want to show that current option's name. Terrific. And I'm just going to clean this up a little bit by making it centered, this button here, and I'll say clear filters. Okay, great. So this is all now a little bit more laid out. Let's just take a peek at the preview. And terrific. So we have the search for the name, price filter, these different filters, and a button to clear filters. So this is terrific, but of course, none of this is hooked up yet. So let's start by just hooking up the book genre choice here. And we want to go to the repeating group and change the data source, the query for the data source for the list that's showing. So in the search for products, we're working on genre first. We want the genre to be equal to the radio buttons A value. And actually, for clarity's sake, maybe I'll relabel these radio buttons to be something a bit clearer. Terrific. So let's go back to this query here. So we have set the search to filter for where the genre of the product is equal to the radio button that's being selected. So let's see how this is working. So now there are no results showing up by default. That's interesting. But if I click on one of the genres here, you'll notice that the search is working. So I have my thriller books showing up, my fantasy books showing up. So that's working, but why were there no options showing up originally? That's because here we told the search to look for products where genre is the selected radio button. So if there is no selected radio button, the search, would apply that filter and not be able to find anything. And that's where this checkbox comes in, which is ignore empty constraints. So if I check this and try it out, we'll see terrific. By default, all the options are showing up, and I can still click on the different genres to filter appropriately. So I'm going to go ahead and hook up the other radio buttons here in basically the same way. So that hooks up the format radio button. We're going to hook up the type radio button. And shop should work in a pretty similar way. Great. Let's try this out. Terrific. Oh, I noticed a small bug. When I copied and pasted this text element, I forgot to update it. This is supposed to show seller shop, but I copied and pasted the price text element here. So let me just go ahead and fix that really quickly. That's this text element here. And we want the seller shop's name to show up. Let's see if that's working as I expect. Great. So we can filter by the seller's name as well. Great. Okay. So that seems to be working down here. Let's do the price filter next. So in the search for the repeating group, I can say price should be maybe less than or equal to the slider's value. And then the final thing here is we'll just hook up this search box. So name contains the input's value. So if we use the contains filter, it will actually do a case-sensitive search. One thing we can try is instead of contains, we could do contains keywords. The last thing we need to do here is to hook up this clear filters button. So from this button, I can click add workflow. And so when the button is clicked, we want to reset all the inputs and radio buttons in that group. And so that's actually what this action, reset data on a group, does. And so I'll tell it to reset the group called G filters. And let's see if this works. So I'll just randomly click a few options here and then click clear filters, and terrific. So this is where this course is going to leave off. The next course will actually take what we've built from here and add some backend workflows and kind of give it even richer functionality. But real quick, before they take over, I do want to show off one last thing. As I sign off, I do want to share a taste of what some more development in Bubble can do to elevate a page and make it look just that much more polished and official. So the functionality will stay the same, but we'll just take the design a couple steps further. Thanks so much for watching, and yeah, please let us know if there are any questions. Take care.
To get things started, I have a question for you, Alan. Now that we have a page for browsing the marketplace, what would you want to add next to the front end?
Yeah, great question. To define the words kind of front end and maybe the opposite back end for folks who might be newer to kind of web development, you can think of the term front end as roughly meaning stuff that you see on the page and any logic that kind of lives on the page to make stuff work on the page. And back end is stuff that happens in the database and any logic that you have running more behind the scenes. That's not the most scientific definition, but that's kind of how you can think of the difference there. So for the front end, one thing we probably want to do is just polish it up a little bit. So you could apply some of your own branding, you could apply your colors, you could apply your styles. And Bubble has a bunch of different features that help promote standardization of all these things across your app. In the sense that one of the hallmarks of a more well-designed page is that you are using the same color palette throughout the entire website. You're using the same size and shapes of different elements and things like that. And Bubble has a bunch of features to help you more easily standardize those kinds of things across the board. In terms of other front-end features, maybe you want to add a header bar, and that header lets users sign up or log in. For the repeating group that's on the page that shows all the books in the app, maybe you want sorting, as an example. It could also be interesting just putting on my product manager hat to think about what do users want to do from each listing. Maybe, for example, each listing shows the different genre and book type and things like that. Maybe clicking on one of those will actually automatically apply that filter to the entire repeating group, as an example, to promote browsing. And maybe you want to start diving into other features for that page, like the ability to mark that you have read a certain book, or maybe in this case, like mark that you already own a certain book, and we'll kind of like not show that as an option for you to buy. So lots of different fun ideas of where you could go.
Love all of those ideas. I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat about data, so going to kind of shift over to ask some of those data questions.
Sure.
To start, what would you say is the underlying difference between using option sets versus data types?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I saw some great responses come in on the comment stream. But to address it verbally, so at first glance, it's a really good question because these two different concepts in Bubble will seem pretty similar, right? In both cases, you're defining a type of idea that you want in the app. So in one case, it's a data type. In the other case, it's an option set. And within each of those like ideas, you can have like several entries of records, so to speak, that are in that category. In the app data side of it, we call each entry a thing. And then on the option set side, we call each entry an option. So the way I think about option sets is that they are very useful when you have a relatively fixed list of options for a given thing. So maybe like a canonical example is like days of the week, right? There are 7 days of the week. Those are not going to change. Those are not going to change based on user input. So because it's relatively fixed, you can define those as 7 different options in an option set. In our app example, we wanted a very fixed list of genres that were available, as well as book types and such. That's kind of a choice of app design, right? You could easily imagine or want a marketplace app where maybe you want more flexibility with what genres exist over time. It is always possible to add more options to an option set later. But maybe, for example, you want to build an app where, in a way where you can even have users create genres in your marketplace app, right? Anytime you want users to be interacting, like creating or deleting or editing entries, that's probably where you want to go with the database and the data type to house that.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying the difference. For users who have sample data in the form of a CSV file, is there a way that they can upload that into Bubble?
Yeah, definitely. In the editor, if you go to the data tab and the app data subtab, I believe there's a button there that says upload. And that's where you can have a CSV, and it'll walk you through a little flow to take all the columns of the CSV and map them onto the fields of the data type that you're working with. Incidentally, I think there's another button on the app data subtab that lets you modify records in bulk based on the CSV, and you can also export all of the records into a CSV.
Awesome. A similar but related question. Does Bubble have any plans to use AI to actually help generate placeholder data when users are building apps?
Yeah, that's a fun idea. It's come up within the team as well. We're fond of the idea. Nothing to promise quite yet, but it's a fun idea.
Awesome. I'm also seeing a question from a user that I really like. I think the user's wondering how exactly to take the lesson that we just learned on like responsive design and how to apply that to what you just showed us how to build. So could you speak to that a little bit and making sure that all elements are responsive?
Yeah, great question. And responsive is definitely one of the bigger concepts to learn about with web development in general. Bubble does have kind of an entire feature set to facilitate responsive design. And for folks who might not know what that means, when we say the word responsive, it means how does the page look on different screen widths. So your audience is going to be on lots of different types of devices, maybe something that might be on mobile. And you will want to think about how each page of your app looks on a laptop screen width, maybe mobile screen width, maybe even bigger screen widths. So responsive design is the process of adapting your app to be able to work well on different screen widths. So yeah, as I mentioned, Bubble has kind of a whole feature set around this. In the video, we saw concepts like row containers versus column containers. Row versus column will impact how that particular element reacts as the screen width changes. So basically, as we were building that page in the Marketplace app, we were starting to lay the groundwork for responsive design. We were starting to think about how will this layout adapt depending on screen width. Honestly, the way I like to approach this is to just do a pass designing what I want the page to look like on the default width, which is usually like laptop screen width. And then at some point, it's kind of like a mini project, if you will, to explicitly go into a mode where I am fine-tuning the design for different screen widths. So every element will have some kind of a default behavior as the screen width changes. Sometimes that default behavior will try to adapt to different screen widths, and sometimes the default behavior just means the element does not try to do anything to adapt. And so when you're in the mode of responsive design, you kind of want to first see by default, what does this page look like at a different screen width? And then you can go into different elements and flip the right switches and set the right configuration to get what you want it to look like. There are lots of different features here, lots of different settings you can control. So you really do have basically infinite freedom to at your fingertips to design this. Sometimes, just to give a tip, sometimes it's actually easier to create maybe a separate element that only shows up on certain screen widths, rather than to try to take the same container and force it to work across all screen widths. So it is really dependent on what you're trying to do. And I know the community has a lot of resources around responsive design as well. It's definitely a fun, meaty topic to dive into.
Absolutely, and one that Gregory John does a really great job teaching.
Mhm.
So there's also a question from a user about lazy load,
Mhm.
and appreciate the context that this user provided. Let's say you have a data source that has several hundreds of thousands of rows, and you may not want all of that to show up all at once in a repeating group. So I think the question here is, can the interface just display the first 10 rows, and as a user is scrolling down, display the next 10, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, great question. So by default, Bubble does try to do some smart things to optimize the loading of data onto a page. So there is some layer of like default behavior we're trying to do as a platform to kind of facilitate this. If you are trying to do a more specific experience around lazy loading, like what's described in the question here, that should be entirely possible. You just have to take a few different building blocks that Bubble offers to piece them together. So in this example, I'm kind of reading this as like, okay, when the page loads, show 10 items, user clicks a button to load more. And I think what that would look like is you kind of set the repeating group, or maybe you're even using a table element in this case, to just show a query items until number 10, as an example, to start. And then when you click the button, that could be hooked up to a workflow, which changes the query of the repeating group or table to show more. That's kind of one way to do it. There are many other permutations of ways to achieve this effect.
Amazing. It always blows my mind how many different ways you can build the same thing in Bubble and lots of different ways to approach it. All right, we have some more questions about data. So going back to data, how do you know what data types you need and then what fields to add and then how to get them to interact with each other? It sounds like sometimes users have a challenging time figuring out those database interactions. So any advice you would have?
Yeah, this is definitely one thing we hear from users a lot. So actually in our online documentation, which is at manual.bubble.io, I believe is the URL, there are different articles that give examples of what the setup of your database, or database schema as it's called, what these might look like for different types of apps. So I think we have an example for a marketplace, we have an example for, like a SaaS tool, et cetera, et cetera. So one thing that might help is to look at those articles and kind of just get a feel for what some examples are. My mental model for thinking about the database is that data types are the types of objects that I have in the database. And these map sort of onto real life objects, right? So in the example we just saw, my marketplace will have lots of book listings. A book is a real life object. And if you have lots of different books, there are different properties of those books that you might be interested in. Things like each book has a title, each book has an author, each book maybe has a plot summary. Each of those properties could essentially become a field on the book data type in your app database. The other example we saw was sort of sellers or shops that are in the marketplace. That's kind of a real world concept. Like you have a person who's trying to sell books on your marketplace, and what are the different properties you might want to know or interact with in the app about that particular seller.
Awesome. Yeah, super helpful. I think we're also getting a question about when to create relationship fields on an object, because you do have that option on a data type to create a field, and it can be a list of other data types in Bubble. And for some of our users who are more technical, I think we often get the question, is Bubble a relational database? So just curious if you could address this question.
Yeah. Bubble is its own flavor of relational database. So if you're coming from like a software engineering background, we have something that kind of achieves what you would call a join, but it's kind of in a Bubble specific way that we think, or we hope is pretty easy to work with for non-technical folks. So this is, again, one of those areas where there's often more than one right way to achieve an end goal. One question to ask yourself is, okay, if you have a field on one data type that is really representable with a record from a thing from a different data type, how do you want to make that connection, right? And as the question suggests, there are a few different options right off the bat, right? You can kind of say like, okay, if you have a book, the book has a seller, the seller could be a thing that's from the seller data type in your app, right? So that's kind of a connecting those two data types in one direction. Maybe you also want to consider for each seller thing, you want to maintain a list of what books that seller is offering. So that would actually be a field on seller that's a list of books on this way. So it's kind of a relationship going in the opposite direction. And there are very valid reasons to do both, actually. It comes at the consequence that you have to kind of like maintain the record correctly on both sides. But there are very valid reasons for wanting that. So yeah, unfortunately, the answer to this question is, it kind of depends on what you're trying to do at the end of the day. So again, I would recommend honestly looking at some examples of database setups like we have in the manual, just to get a feel for different situations where you might want different options. And the good news at the end of the day is that all these choices are easy to change later on as you build your app, right? Like in pretty much all cases with the Bubble app, like it is very doable to change how you structure something later. You have to put a little bit of work to restructure it. But at the end of the day, like you can always, start with something, learn about how it works, and maybe your needs change, and then update it later.
Absolutely. Databases will continue to evolve over time. Well, that's all the time we have for questions. Alan, thank you for walking us through how to build a marketplace search page.